Okay, good morning, everybody. It's 12:04 by my watch, so we're going to get cracking. Thank you, everybody, for joining this morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where in the world you are located. So thank you for joining. We'll be looking at how operators can support improved transparency in agricultural value chains. As I've said earlier, my name is Matthew Strickland. I am a market engagement manager here within the mAgri team at GSMA. Before we get started in earnest, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. We are recording the webinar and we'll share a link with everybody who has registered to attend once that becomes available after we finish. We're going to run for just about an hour, and we'll include some time for Q&A in this session. So please, if you do have a question for us, share it in the Q&A tool. Some of you already found that, or the chat box. I've got some colleagues in my team I'll introduce a bit later who are monitoring those, and we'll get through as many as we can in the session. If there are some that we can't do today, then we'll endeavour to follow up and provide some answers afterwards. So in the invite and the some of the marketing material, we have posed a couple of questions that we wanted to answer today. So we'll talk about identifying value chains that are likely targets for digitisation, and we shall explain a little bit more about what this means in a few moments. We'll look at what the likely partnerships are required to deliver digital solutions for agricultural value chains. Lots of stakeholders in there, and we'll talk a little bit about how they can be structured. And also we shall spend some time on how the mAgri team is working with MNOs to advance last mile digitisation. So before we get started in earnest and start answering those questions, I just wanted to introduce the programme in a little bit more detail and some of our activities, and also provide a little bit of context to the background of what we're talking about today. So the mAgri, or the Mobile for Agriculture programme, works with the mobile industry. We are part of the wider Mobile for Development team here at the GSMA in London and across 6 or 7 other offices around the globe. We're working with mobile industry to identify opportunities to deliver technology-based innovations which have a socio-economic impact. The mission of mAgri specifically is to advance smallholder farmers' productivity, their profitability, and support their financial inclusion through scalable and commercial mobile services. Since we started the programme back in 2009, we've supported 12 projects targeting information services via mobile phones and have reached over 10 million smallholder farmers across Asia and Africa. So I work in the engagement side of the team. We also have an insights and knowledge sharing program where we publish a range of resources, case studies and market reports, and also toolkits to present best practices for service design, business models and go-to-market strategies. We also convene the industry at various events to share these learnings and experiences with industry practitioners and host a range of workshops throughout the year. So one for your diary is to look out for M360 Africa, which is coming up in Kigali, Rwanda in July. Over the last 18 months or so, we have been looking more broadly at the agricultural value chain digitisation area, which is a mouthful, and we'll hear it a few times today. So I do apologise in advance for that. We've got active engagements with 3 operators in 3 different markets to develop enterprise solutions aimed at the agricultural vertical. Our plan for the coming year is to expand this into another 4 markets. So we'll talk about that a little later. But first, I mentioned I want to set some context. So why are we looking at agri value chain digitisation? How is it of interest to MNOs, agribusinesses, and of course, smallholder farmers? So we know in developing countries, agriculture contributes between 10 to 35% of GDP. typically, close to 50% of the labour force is employed in agriculture, with about 500 million smallholder families dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods. A large proportion of these agribusinesses, including major corporations in food and beverage industries, procure directly from smallholder farmers. They're responsible for supplying around about 70% of the food production consumed worldwide. What we find is that the vast majority of smallholders are still unbanked and operating in a cash economy, receiving cash payments for the sale of their agri-produce and also for any government transfers that might be available in their country. Smallholder farmers and agribusinesses face a lot of inefficiencies within their agri-value chains currently, primarily related to the predominance of cash, but also to a lack of agri-assets like tools and inputs, inadequate knowledge and appropriate farming practices, and a lack of visibility into the value chain. Given these inefficiencies, particularly with cash, where there's the cost of time associated with either transporting or going to collect cash, opportunities for theft and fraud, and the overall kind of lack of transparency or visibility for buyers and sellers of crops, a range of digital tools can lead to business performance improvements for farmers and agribusinesses, and eventually to financial inclusion for farmers. So we have on this slide a range of, if you like, modules going across the screen. Where we've been operating before and where there's been a lot of work is in the information services for mobile. Mobile money offers on one hand a very obvious area for improvements and increasing efficiencies in value chains and transparency. But as you move through things like digital profiles, track and trace for farm management systems, for certification processes, you start to build this transparency into the value chain. So we talked about trying to push farmers along this route to, or the pathway to, financial inclusion. What might that look like? For many farmers, they're going to start out on the left-hand side of this page. So an entry point into financial inclusion, or the first entry point, could be receiving payments for a crop into their mobile wallet. They will need to interact with a mobile agent to cash out, or maybe they want to cash in existing cash to transfer it to a relative or someone else further who lives further away. This pathway to financial inclusion, or in order to access derivative services or more complex digital services like credit, savings, insurance, the farmer needs to move along this pathway. And it's not going to be an instant switch from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. This is going to be a case of learning how to use these tools through a number of other digital services. So they can start topping up their airtime through the USSD menu, or the mobile money menu, I should say, peer-to-peer remittances, bill payments and merchant payments for inputs for their farm. So this is the pathway as we see it for smallholders. The interesting thing here is that over time, the transaction records for B2P payments could start being used for these derivative services. So banks or microfinance institutions can start looking at farmers' productivity and their transactional records. And through the use of, or through the visibility of, regular digital transactions and the sale of, say, agri-produce and other derivative services, other mobile money services, can start to create an economic identity for farmers. There may be in some markets an opportunity to also digitize G2P, or government-to-person payments for agricultural subsidies. What we're seeing, or what we know, is there are also significant benefits for mobile money providers in digitizing these payments. On the consumer business side, direct revenue from cash out fees from farmers who've received their agri-produce sales into their wallet, but also subsequent ecosystem transactions that farmers may perform, like these bill payments, merchant payments and P2P transfers. Indirect benefits could be seen in the form of new mobile users or new subscribers to their services in rural areas, as a result of value chain digitisation initiatives. Increased overall network usage with more consumption of voice messaging and VAS, for instance. On the enterprise side of the business, there's a direct revenue stream in the form of transaction fees for agribusinesses outgoing transactions to farmers. So typically there is a percentage of the transaction value is what the MNO would charge. Initially, remittances and bill payments are the most relevant mobile money ecosystem service for farmers. Mobile money enables rural families to pay for utilities, health services, education fees, and government services. And GSMA research has shown that school fees are one of the most significant cash outflows for a rural household, with time being wasted and the potential of theft being major issues for parents paying their school fees. What we need to consider, or what we need to recognise, is that this straight line may not actually be a straight line in reality. So it's important not to disregard this adoption curve of these digital services in rural regions. What we have seen is that some mobile money providers and financial institutions have actually kind of jumped ahead of their own ecosystem readiness or their own operational readiness, trying to drive straight to the kind of golden nugget of these derivative services. Across the markets that we've researched, and we've got a number of publications on our website, we're seeing some of these barriers play out in the form, or we're seeing certain barriers along this pathway. So to name a couple, there are things like coverage gaps. Obviously, rural expansion is a difficult business challenge for MNOs to overcome. A lack of a reliable, liquid agent network, which is essential for this completing this last mile agricultural payments. Admittedly, this is more challenging to implement rurally, trying to manage this agent network to keep their liquidity levels high. And then we're also seeing a lack of product awareness, knowledge, and trust amongst the actual farmers themselves. So we've seen that whilst they may have heard of a service, they can't really tell you what it's about, what the benefits are, and how to use it. Of course, there's also tech literacy, which is another barrier. So having provided a little bit of context, let's start looking at how we might support the development of such an ecosystem. For us here in the team, identifying suitable value chains to target as the building block for growing this digital ecosystem is an extremely important part of the process. So what we've actually done is we've created a value chain assessment framework. As you can see, this is a three-step process which integrates a feedback loop. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail over the next couple of slides. So starting with value chain prioritization, we've used a whole host of time series data and a few assumptions to build a prioritization model. This creates a targeted list or a priority list of suitable value chains by country that are starting points for further assessment. The value chain selection and mapping element is taking these priority chains and digging a little deeper. So gaining a better understanding of value chain structures via remote research, telephone interviews, and secondhand research to identify which of these prioritized value chains actually come out towards the top of the pile in terms of their readiness or suitability for digitization. But also looking at agribusinesses who are operating in those value chains. And then the third and just as important element is actually validating this secondhand or remote research through in-field research. This has a dual purpose. One is to really understand who the players are in the system that aren't immediately obvious from remote research, but also it helps start building relationships with potential partners or indeed pilot partners or indeed commercial partners as you move forward down the journey. So because this prioritization element is very important, let's just have a look at that in a little bit more detail. Actually, before I move on to that, the feedback loop here is that by conducting the in-field research, you can actually use the information gathered there to feed back into your prioritization model. refine that, and see if new learnings actually change which crops or value chains you may want to investigate. So sorry, let's just have a look at this prioritization model in a bit more detail. The GSMA, Agri and a bunch of other teams internally, we've actually developed a 7-indicator forecasting model, which is built on a high number of inputs and variables. With these 7 indicators, we've weighted, and by comparing and contrasting these scores, you actually build this prioritization of value chains. So things like, for instance, the growth outlook for a crop, the volume of production, size and frequency of transactions, and the degree of formality in the market, which we're going to come on to a bit later. These all mix together to provide this prioritization score. So why these in particular? Let me give you an example. We started the webinar by talking about building a pathway to financial inclusion. So in order to drive adoption of digital payments, and ultimately this use of derivative services by smallholders, value chains which incorporate a high frequency of low value transactions are potentially more attractive than a low frequency and relatively higher value transaction value chain. So to give you a bit more context, if you take the tea industry, for instance, this grows throughout the year. There's a minimum frequency of monthly payments made to smallholder farmers. Whereas if you compare that to maize or another crop that's harvested, say, during a 1 or 2 month period during the year, there may be only a handful of payments as batches are sold, but actually the value of these payments is really high. Now, this has quite a few implications, but to highlight just a few. From a farmer perspective, regular payments can actually help drive usage and familiarity with these mobile services. By regularly using a tool, you learn to use it better. From the MNO or the agent perspective, regular, relatively low value payments to farmers helps reduce the liquidity burden on local agents. We know that at first, a farmer is going to get paid into their wallet. They're going to want to cash out straight away. They want to feel that cash in their hand while they're building knowledge and trust of a service. Also, from the agent perspective, regular payments and cash outs mean regular commissions for agents rather than only at specific times of the year. So further incentivizing them to keep their skin in the game, as it were, encourages the build or the evolution of that liquid and available agent network in the areas. Then from the agribusiness perspective, a repetitive burden or the risk of managing and administrating cash payments on a monthly basis presents a much stronger commercial incentive for adopting digital payments. If a business is only making payments during one period of a season, then it may not be such a pain point for that particular setup or operation. So it's important to not isolate these variables. It's their combined interaction which builds a prioritization score from which further research can be conducted. So just the coffee beans in the background are a quick nod to our GSMA intelligence team who put the hours into crunching and developing and refining this model. We've got over 60 markets covered, or 60 countries, and can provide operators with value chain prioritization lists for their markets. In addition to B2P, so business to person and government to person revenue operations, to operate opportunities, pardon me. If you're interested, then please get in touch with us after the webinar. We'll share an email to contact us at the end. So as we mentioned on the previous slide, the modeling or prioritization process is only the first step to help us narrow down on preferred agribusiness partners. It's really important to validate the modeling through field research and actually talking to agribusiness to understand their specific procurement process, operational models, and any pain points which could be addressed through digitisation. So I mentioned the word formality a few moments ago, and we'll address this through the next question. So when we're considering the likely partnerships required to deliver solutions for agricultural value chains. What we're seeing is that the potential to digitize the agricultural last mile is greater in formal value chains. So what do we mean by this? The last mile is the web of relationships and transactions between buyers of crops and farmers who produce and sell their crops. While the majority of farmers operated in formal markets, selling subsistence crops or spare subsistence crops at market, this is a much looser relationship between buyer and seller. When we talk about formal relationships, we're talking about structures towards the right-hand side of this chart, where you have a processor and with an employee field clerk going out and buying regularly from the same sort of farmers who are in some way connected or have an existing established relationship with that particular processor. On the left-hand side, there's a much greater gap between the processor and the farmers who are producing the crop. These middlemen, unlikely to be employees of the processor, the processor may not know the individual farmers by name, and so you have that much looser structure. And we are erring towards the side of these kind of larger commercial agribusinesses or the vertically integrated agribusinesses who have these stronger relationships from which you could leverage a few things. So the introduction of middlemen make it challenging to digitize procurement from farmers. They may not have the same incentives to adopt digitization as a larger processor may have. There's the logistics of actually deploying a solution. So you can imagine the theory of, okay, we're going to launch this product and everyone's going to sign up and start using this service. But actually there's a lot of logistics around this. So in terms of farmer training, sensitization, onboarding, piloting, going through these more formal structures or existing structures between a processor, their employee, field clerks and farmers is a much, I'm going to put quote marks, easier entry point than some of these more informal markets. So, sorry, bear with me 1 second. Yeah, okay, pardon me. So what we're also seeing is that actually these agribusinesses are demanding not just digitization of payments. There's a whole host of business process management services which extend throughout the entire supply chain down to field staff and farmers. They're interested in getting on board to improve their operations and increase their efficiencies as a producer. In developing markets, we've seen solution providers are mostly supporting with enabling more efficient communication, for example, through bulk messaging, some track and trace solutions, allowing visibility into last mile operations and supporting certification and traceability requirements. So certification of things like Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance and the many others that exist. This is also an area for operators to add to their revenue stream. So licensing these sort of tools to an agribusiness is a revenue stream that the MNO can get into. So supply chain management systems, tracking, farm tracking systems, beyond just simply bulk messaging platforms, can add a new revenue stream into an enterprise agreement. There's also the opportunity to generate revenue from G2P or government to person payments through agricultural subsidies. So licensing this sort of tool, which could also actually collect information, manage profiles and data of subsidy beneficiaries, is also an interesting area. But obviously the idea of data harvesting is quite a topical subject currently. Beyond mobile money providers providing digital services, a whole host of vendors are also providing last mile sourcing tools. So if formal value chains provide the best opportunity for digital services or more holistic services, how should that solution be structured? We're generally seeing two different types of ownership model emerging in these last mile digitization solutions. So depending on the market and the availability of solutions will actually drive how operators might want to take this forward. As I'm saying, generally there are two models. So on the left-hand side is the third-party led model, which is quite prevalent at the moment, with a range of third-party tech providers with different skills and experience or expertise, using the core assets of one or more MNO, such as connectivity and mobile money, to develop their own digital solution and market them directly to agribusinesses. The alternative to this model, on the right-hand side, is the operator-led model, which in a given market, one or more tech providers could package or white label a co-branded solution for agribusiness customers. There are pros and cons of both approach. For the third-party model, a benefit would be the agility of these small tech firms to upgrade and customize solutions to enterprise customers' needs. But on the downside, the fragmentation of this type of ecosystem means that agribusinesses need to look at multiple digital tools for last mile sourcing, and having to manage different relationships and contracts with different providers. On the MNO-led model has the potential to actually aggregate lots of these solutions into a suite of services that could be offered as a one face or a single face to the agribusiness, therefore simplifying the provider and user relationship. Key benefits of the MNO-led model is the fact that there is this existing branding and distribution network that they have, and the scale and perhaps a larger brand name than some of these smaller vendor providers. So we've covered quite a lot of the theory here, but in the mAgri team, we like to also walk the walk and not just do the talking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are conducting conducting research and sharing knowledge at the moment with some of these tools and implementing them on the ground. So since around about this time last year, the mAgri team have been operating in 3 markets, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Madagascar, design and develop and launch holistic solutions for agribusiness MNO partnerships, and prove how these services impact stakeholder KPIs, to document the lessons and share insights about which approach has the most impact and which are the most successful services. So following the assessment framework, we've conducted in-depth field research in each country to validate some of our initial prioritization and also identify potential agribusinesses to work with. Each engagement is working on a different value chain, so dairy in Pakistan, tea in Sri Lanka, and vegetables in Madagascar. In order to address the broader holistic service offering, 2 of the operators have actually elected to build their own platform, while the third has chosen to white label a third-party tech vendor's existing services, which will actually go through a process of slight adaptation to meet their needs and integrate with their mobile money service. As the pilots progress, we're working on an iterative basis with the operators to address traditional issues that exist with driving mobile money adoption in rural areas. So we're leveraging some of the structures within these agribusinesses, the formal agribusinesses, to support with the sensitization, training, and deployment of the service. And some of the things that we are seeing and that need to be addressed or that we're working around is things like having accounts that can handle the amounts and the frequency of value chain payments. In some instances, we're seeing that actually, even though we've got frequent and relatively low value payments, some of the wallet sizes don't allow this to happen. So can there be workarounds on the KYC elements or how those payments are made to farmers to overcome those challenges? We're also seeing that so the level of support within the within the operator is critical to the success of these projects. So having a dedicated product manager who is able to pull in or to mobilize cross-functional teams within their operation across departments to work with marketing, to work with sales, to work with training teams if they have these sort of people around to help deploy this service is really important to getting not only confidence among the end users, but also the agribusiness partner to make sure you deliver a quality product. One of the interesting things that we've seen is that both in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, that dairy came out as a really interesting value chain, but was deprioritized in Sri Lanka because of the actual existing structures that we saw on the ground. There was actually already a very, if you like, slick or effective way of getting cash to the end user, which didn't really cause either the agribusiness or the end user farmer, the dairy farmer themselves, a huge amount of pain. They were already attending milk collection points on a daily basis, and it was very easy for them to collect their cash. Obviously, the threat of theft and the lack of digital history is an issue there, but tea rose up as a much more interesting and I guess had more pain points that could be solved with digitisation. So just moving on a little bit to where we're at in 2018, I mentioned right at the top that we're looking to expand our current engagements. So we're looking to work with 4 new operators across either Sub-Saharan Africa or South or Southeast Asian markets who are looking to either scale an existing service or launch a new agricultural value chain digitisation service. Hopefully some of the things we've been talking about has inspired some desire to approach this challenge. So in terms of the support that's on offer from the GSMA team would involve some of this background work to look at prioritization of value chains and areas of interest, but also a bunch of on-the-ground work in terms of partnership brokering, iterative service design, and obviously sharing knowledge with practitioners in the space. We have a process that we need to go through. So again, if you're interested in looking at these opportunities, please do get in touch with us at the end of the webinar. We also don't want to forget our friends at technology providers or vendors. So we are also having a call to action for you guys as well. If you have an existing deployment or are looking to get into this space, then please do get in touch. We can support with either scaling or introducing new markets if that is an area that is part of your strategy, and also how you might want to integrate with mobile money deployments in our priority markets. Alternatively, if you are looking for new project partnerships, then again, please do talk to us. We can help introduce you to MNOs and build symbiotic relationships of that nature. Okay, so I am getting towards the end of the content that I wanted to share. I'm going to look to my colleagues to my left and just see what we have waiting to be answered. Okay, so one question that's come in is, what is the strategy for educating farmers on DFS or digital financial services given the rate of illiteracy? So this is a very interesting question, and is being tackled in a number of ways. So where to start? We've talked about using these formal agribusiness structures or existing structures within an agribusiness. So if I take the example in Sri Lanka, where we're working with a tea company, they have the ability, because of their relationship with farmers, they have their ability to convene farmers for meetings, they regularly are in touch with these farmers anyway to do best practice agricultural activities. So these farmers are used to coming together at relatively regular points to learn about new tools or new techniques, and it's leveraging that existing network and contact base to have people from the MNO, like the training department, going out, talking to these farmers, educating them, talking about how a particular service works, what the benefits are, and making sure that they're using examples that are relevant to farmers in that area. There's no point talking about bill pay to paying utility bills to a farmer who hasn't got electricity wired into their house, as it were. As it happens in Sri Lanka, I'm still yet to find a farmer without electricity in their house. So it is actually a relevant use case for those guys. The next question is, what's the value proposition for an MNO when farmers generally don't want to pay cash out fees? So, okay. The cash out fees are a known, if you like, annoyance for smallholder farmers. The preference from an MNO's point of view is that if they can have a suite of derivative or secondary use cases that prevents the need for that farmer to cash out, then that overcomes this need for a cash out fee. So if I, as a farmer, am receiving my payment on my phone, and I can walk down to my local shop to do my grocery shopping that I normally do, then if I'm able to make a merchant payment in order to buy those goods, I don't have to cash out and then go and pay. I can just use what's in my balance on my phone and make my purchase. Then I can avoid that cash out fee. So what we're seeing in Uganda, for instance, that the agribusiness, in order to drive adoption, has actually taken on board the cash out fee. So if I'm due to be paid £10, they will actually pay me £11 to cover the £1 cash out fee. Obviously, the ratios don't necessarily work in reality, but you get the point. They're actually topping up the normal farmer payment in order to take that pain away from the farmer. There's also a number of options that MNOs can look at in terms of adjusting their pricing and their service offering in rural areas to reduce these fees, or work on different commission structures with agents in order that they can reduce these cash out fees and make it more acceptable for the farmers to cash out. Let's just have a look. Sorry, I'm buzzing through these because I want to try and make sure I cover as many as possible. So can you elaborate on the financial needs of rural households? What kind of mobile money services, if any, farmers want? Okay, so that's a great question. We've seen that there are farmers, it's difficult to generalize, but in some cases we've seen farmers who say, I really want to be paid digitally because it's really hard not to spend my money when I get it in my hand. We've gone to a number of agribusinesses and across different markets, and on payday you will see a market sets up overnight at the gates of that factory because they know that the farmers are going to be paid. They've got a load of cash in their pocket, and so they're waving all of their goods in front of these guys to relieve them from their cash. So on one side of things, farmers are saying, I really want it digitally because then I know it's harder for me to spend, and I know I can put it into a savings wallet, for instance. Other farmers that we've spoken to, they are living remotely. Let's say they're up a hill where they're growing their tea. Sorry for using tea examples the whole time, but they may be living a long way from an urban area. So actually, if they're having to walk to a factory to pick up their payment, then get into town to drop it into a bank, or even if they've been paid into a bank and they have to go to town to collect their money anyway, if they're upwards of 20 kilometers away, this is actually a massive hassle for them. So if they're able to get there, essentially sit on their sofa and receive their payment, we are seeing that farmers want that sort of service. Obviously, there are others. There's a whole social thing around payday and meeting up with their colleagues, well, not colleagues, but their fellow farmers. So there is a social element to that payday process as well. But school fees, remittance, school fees, receiving subsidies electronically, we are seeing that farmers want these sort of services, or certainly have alluded to the fact, I didn't know that was the case. That would be really interesting for me. So next question, what are the opportunities for MNOs in terms of data collection for farmers? So this is really interesting, and we talked at the start, or one of the slides showed this module 3 was the idea of a digital identity. So if one of the things that's missing at the moment between providing derivative services, or let's say providing credit, and farmers who are producing on a regular basis, is linking the data between what the farmer has done regularly over the last 5, 6, 7 years and getting that information in front of some sort of financial provider. So what we're interested in, and what is interesting from an operator's perspective, is this idea of digitizing these procurement records. Lots of agribusinesses are sitting on a long history of production data. If you can combine that production data with a mobile wallet usage and history, and start combining that data together and building this digital economic profile, that starts to become a bit more interesting for financial service providers. So for an MNO to have that data and be able to partner with some sort of financial institution to start offering, in the start, small loans through their mobile money wallet, that becomes quite an interesting secondary use case for mobile money or for mobile wallets. Sorry, there's a question here that says, do you think there is potential to work on DFS projects in value chains that you describe as less suited? If so, how could you engage in such value chains? So what we're by focusing on formal value chains, we're not saying that you cannot digitize the more informal market. From our perspective, and the kind of proving the case perspective, for us, it's easier to leverage existing structures and relationships in order to conduct training, in order to do the sensitization and onboarding of farmers. So we're not saying that you cannot digitize an informal market. In fact, there are so many small value, high frequency transactions there. It's actually a really interesting area. It's a case that there is potential there. It's more what's the entry point? Who do you need to talk to in order to start these digital payments taking hold? Who's going to be the first mover to say, okay, we're now only accepting digital, because there's a risk then that you're actually driving people to other buyers. So it can be done. It's not that it can't be done. It's a case of identifying the entry points into that value chain to start the digitization process. So, sorry, someone has mentioned, I'm not quite clear on what GSMA means with digital identity. What is it and how can it help farmers to access credit? So I'm hoping I may have answered that one with the previous one about MNO and data, but just to add a bit more detail, in fact, if I bring the slide back up, this might help us here as well. So it's this point number 3 here. So there's at the moment there are lots of different silos of information that are floating around. So the farmer maybe gets their receipt at the end of the month to say how much crop they've provided to the factory, to the agribusiness, or when they sell their maize, they get you had this loan at the start of the season, we're taking X amount off to repay that loan, and here's the balance that you get to keep. So at the moment, there's no way that the farmer can leverage the fact that they have produced, 30, 100, 150 kilos of maize that season. And they've been able to do that regularly over the last X number of seasons. So this digital identity is digitizing things like their production history that an agribusiness might already have digitized in their database anyway. And if we can combine that with other sources of information, so how often are they topping up their airtime? How many transactions do they make on mobile money? Have they had a small loan that they've been able to pay back through a mobile money wallet? This is the digital identity that we're talking about. And by combining that data and using some if you like, credit scoring algorithm, then can we start getting credit down to these farmers? Some extra questions coming in. What is the reason the focus should be on MNOs driving this? Why not aggregators, agribusinesses, etc.? Great question. How to answer this one? It's a great question. So what we're trying to show here is that there is an opportunity for MNOs to drive this, and the fact is that if they don't drive it, then other people will, because there is an opportunity there for MNOs to get organised and generate B2B generate revenue through this digitisation process. It's a case of an agribusiness may not have the wherewithal or the knowledge to go down this route if not driven by a third party. There are plenty of agribusinesses that I've been to and spoken to who are, I've had to sit there and explain how mobile money works, for instance. So they know how to grow the stuff. They don't necessarily know about all the technical solutions that exist out there. So aggregators, yes, they could drive this. We talked about these different models. I'm just trying to find the slide for you. There are pros and cons from both sides. So an aggregator, yes, of course, they could offer these solutions, but from the agribusiness perspective, if this becomes too fragmented, then it becomes a messy solution that they have in front of them. Okay, next question. What type of support do you offer, in-kind, etc.? You say that we will send them the link on our website. Okay, so we have a range of support that we can provide to agribusinesses, to MNOs. We've got a strong history of product iteration. So what do I mean by that? We have a team of we have business analysts within the team. We have engagement managers like myself within the team who can look at various factors that are operating in a service. So there is obviously the hard quantitative usage data that you get from the CDRs, the interaction records, that we can do analysis on and segment to say, okay, we can see that users are coming into the service once, but then they're never coming back. There are some users who are doing X, Y, and Z on the service, but they're getting stuck at a certain section. This part of the service is not being used. So this sort of quantitative analysis that we can do. There is also a whole range of qualitative support that we provide. So things like supporting MNOs with field research, so either remote telephone interviews of users or on-the-ground UX support, but also this idea of, okay, let's bring all this data together. Let's throw it, mix it up in the pot. What is this telling you about your service? And generating ideas of how that might be implemented going forward to improve, and then coming back and looking again on a, let's say, a quarterly cycle to say, okay, we've made these changes. What's worked, what's not worked, what do we need to do again in order to push and grow the service forward? We've got a question from Bangladesh. There is a question on how to inject digital payments in a cycle where farmers already receive credit from agribusinesses and are dependent on that credit for agri inputs. Let me just reread that one then. How to inject digital payments in a cycle where farmers already receive credit from agribusinesses. Okay, right, I'm with you. So this is the idea that, let's say a farmer, if I understand correctly, let's say a farmer receives fertilizer from an agribusiness in order to help at a subsidised rate to help them increase their yield on their farm. They're going to be they're going to be supplying their crop, getting paid, but having deductions made from their payments. And so there's this cycle of, okay, well, I don't need to go to a third-party credit service because I've already got this kind of fertilizer credit. There are opportunities here that the agribusiness, actually, this could be quite a big cash burn for the business because they are, if they're buying fertilizer for themselves as an agribusiness, or they have this cash flow tied up in this loan, if you like, to the farmer, they may want to move away from that. They may not want to carry that burden and be responsible for recouping this payment from the farmers. It could be that there's actually an opportunity to make the repayments of that fertilizer loan more transparent. So at the moment, a farmer may not really be clear or understand how many payments are left outstanding on that loan. So let me restructure that. If a farmer is paying, let's say, I don't know, $50 for a bag of fertilizer, and that's going to be over 5 months repaid at $10 per month, then actually having a digital system that notifies them that you've got X amount remaining could actually provide more transparency rather than having some sort of field clerk or whoever saying, oh no, actually you still got another month to pay, and pocketing the extra cash. Okay, we've probably got time for maybe one or two if we can squeeze them in. Is there a correlation between digital literacy and agri value chain digitisation? Is uptake higher in higher literacy environments? Very good question. So what we are seeing is that there is it's not necessarily direct. Yes, it's more likely, but what we're actually seeing is even, I can say the service that I'm working on at the moment, we are seeing illiterate women still using the service. So they are finding other ways around being able to stay part of the project. So they are using a daughter or a child or a son who's home from school to actually interact with the service on their behalf. So they want to remain included. They want to benefit from what's being offered. There are often workarounds that they can utilize in order to stay part of this. But yes, it's like, yeah, of course, the higher the literacy, the more likely that they're going to be able to benefit and understand if it's not an immediate benefit to them, the longer term thinking behind getting involved in this sort of service. I'm going to do one final question because we're getting close to the end. Challenges that we've encountered implementing these projects. So, linked to the previous question, yes, it's very, very difficult to build a one size fits all solution with such a range of technical literacy, such a range of income, that some of these services may not provide an immediate benefit in the very, very short term to a farmer. It might be that if we're building a digital identity, it takes 6 to 8 months of digital history before they can benefit from such a service. So how do you explain to these guys that kind of giving up their data for no immediate that day or the next day benefit. That is quite a hard sell. And the way we're working around that at the moment is that it's repeated and frequent. I don't want to use the word re-education, but it's staying in front of them and making sure that they are also in front of their peers and seeing how their peers are benefiting from the service to make sure that they stay engaged and stay interested in the project. There's also other things. There's lots of other challenges. So the agreements. There's obviously price is an issue between the agribusiness. If the price of the service being offered doesn't outweigh the actual price of how, or the cost of how an agribusiness is operating at the moment, there's obviously very little incentive for them to take the project on any further. So we've reached the end of the hour. I am just going to, here we go, put our email up on the screen. If you do have extra questions that we've not been able to cover today, please don't let them stew. Please send them through to us and we will do our very best to answer them. I hope that you have found the webinar interesting and that we've been able to answer some of your questions, albeit very briefly and very quickly. We are going to be at M360 in Kigali in July, so reach out to us and we can explain to you what's going on there. We'll share the recording. We can share the slides. Reach out to us at mAgri@gsma.com. Thank you very much for